in your head. Given this list so far, I would also start sweating if I were you. This is a scary one. This deep dive horror story comes from username One Dumb Diver. Great name, they clearly made this account just to share this occasion, so let's dive in. Nowadays, we dive with shark shields, which emit electronic pulses that freak the sharks out and keep them away. But back then, what we used was essentially a chainmail sleeve. The idea being that sharks hate the taste of metal, so if you give it your arm, it'll bite down, decide you're gross, and then move along. So I wait, it comes over, and I make a perfect move to give it my arm. However, just before the crunch, it occurred to me that I had left my sleeve on my bed. Now I had a huge open, gashing wound on my arm from the bite in open water, and I trailed blood everywhere. Not an ideal scenario. So once the shock finally wore off, you realize that you're in salt water, and salt and open wounds, they don't feel good. In a panic, I dropped my weight belt and shot up to the surface without any sort of waiting period. Not great. Because I hadn't been paying attention to the currents, I was approximately a quarter mile downstream of my boat, which meant that I had to swim back up to it. After getting bitten by a shark, imagine having to swim, that is a nightmare scenario. Glad you're okay. Also, you're not a dumb diver, you're experiencing the things. You're figuring it out. You're doing great. You're brave. I don't even like going in lakes. Number 5, more sea snakes. Coming from Patrick667 about a year ago as well, they posted, so 3 days ago I went snorkeling off Mimba Island in Zanzibar. Everything went normal and we started heading back, so I grabbed my net and I put my black fins, my black mask, snorkel, and black wetsuit inside. Once back ashore, I grab my bag, jump off the boat, and head to the rental office to return said equipment. At that point, I feel my bag is moving somehow. At first look, it seemed like a flat black worm squirming quickly. After rotating the bag, I realized I was looking at only the tail of a 1 meter long black sea snake, one of the most venomous reptiles ever, trying to get out of the net. Like in the lobby. How it got there, I have no freaking clue. That is a nightmare scenario. Imagine being like, thanks so much, I had a great time. Here's a sand dollar. Also, don't mind the venomous snake. Number 4, the frilled shark. Back in 2004, marine biologists discovered this dinosaur, the frilled shark, just hanging out, just lurking about 870 meters below the surface. So if you're anywhere around there, watch out. This one looks like an eel almost. It's so scary looking, it's so slippery and quick. Frilled sharks can grow up to 7 feet long and they fight in the dark. They don't need to see to attack you, which is pretty terrifying considering all these deep dive stories are all in the pitch black. So unless you're a deep diver, you're not really gonna run into the frilled shark. Have you ever dealt with one of these? Are you a diver? Are you watching this because you're a diver? Please comment down below if you are. Comment some of your personal experiences. These were a nightmare to read. I couldn't even finish half of them. Everything is so dangerous and so fast underwater. Number 3, snapping shrimp. This little guy can literally create a sonic boom as it attacks you. That's how fast it is. You won't see him coming, and neither did this diver. Here's a clip of a mantis shrimp punching through a diver's gear. Yeah, right through their water shoes. Bam!
Ow! That really hurt.
They're so quick. Oh my God, they're tiny, but they really hit. They're often found.
FcRn is a receptor that preserves harmful IgG antibodies that drive many autoimmune diseases. For years, scientists have explored blocking the FcRn receptor from attaching to IgGs to see if this could reduce symptoms for people with autoimmune diseases caused by rogue antibodies.
In coral reefs, oyster reefs, these little guys, these pistol shrimp, they hit their prey at 100 kilometers per hour. And in doing so, a large air bubble is created, and because this, Mike Tyson shrimp is so quick with the left hook, the following pop is around 200 decibels. The sound alone can stun its prey, and if they're lucky, it sometimes kills them. That's how you want to go out. You don't want to go out with one of these Superman punches to the neck. Number 2, comb stars. Ocean life is by far the scariest thing out there. We have no idea what's in our oceans. We discover some crazy shit every year. Some deep sea fish with bioluminescence are for sure aliens, while others are just natural predators that look scary. Like the comb star, for example. This guy was not in Finding Nemo. He would have been a weird addition. A comb star is a starfish that contains tetrodotoxin, which is this deadly neurotoxin that can cause paralysis. Yeah, Finding Nemo, that movie would be over in 8 minutes if this guy was there. Per every gram of comb star flesh, there's enough toxin to take out 500 mice. So if you have a mice problem, honestly, you can call one guy. It's a very specific, weird call, but I know how you can do it. A little bit of tetrodotoxin. Tetrodotoxin? Tetrodotoxin. That's what it's called. And finally, coming in at number 1, the electric eel. Awesome. That's the worst thing I've ever seen. Great. The moray eel, first of all, don't do what he just did. Don't go up to a random eel and start rubbing it like it's a genie lamp. That's not smart. It's not a Great Dane. You don't want to do that. That was the moray eel. That one can bite your fingers off in like 2 seconds. But you should never touch an eel in the first place because a lot of them are electric. Yeah, just like that MGMT song that's now stuck in our heads. As its name suggests, there's types of eels that can mess you up even if you were to get the first hit. Specifically, the newly discovered 2.5 meter Electrophorus volti. Appropriately named after Alessandro Volta, aka the guy who invented the battery, this eel can release a shock up to 860 volts, which is more than 7 times the voltage of a wall plug. A swimming wall plug that gets hungry. Nice. We love nature. I'm never swimming again.
Number 10. 7,000-year-old execution grave. In 2013, near Halberstadt, archaeologists were excavating a Neolithic settlement site when they came across a grisly discovery. The team, led by Christian Meyer, found a burial pit filled with nearly complete skeletons of 9 people who lived approximately 7,000 years ago. Through testing of isotopes in their bones and teeth, which are different between people depending on diet and other factors, scientists deduced that these people were from a different location than the rest of the bodies that were buried in the area. The 9 skeletons were also in positions that would indicate that they were thrown into the pit somewhat haphazardly, as opposed to being buried ceremoniously like some of the others near the same site were. The most disturbing part is how this grave differs from other graves around the country. In all of these other sites, the dead have all perished in different ways, as made clear with the forensic analysis of the bones, from spears to blunt force to natural causes. However, in the Halberstadt site, all of the dead have the same fatal wound on the back of the head, implying that these people were executed in the same precise way, with a blow from a blunt weapon in the same spot. The archaeologists believe that this, combined with the fact that the dead found were mostly men, shows that these people were an attacking party who were clearly unsuccessful in their raid. Number 9. Sunken ship. Before I tell you this next dark discovery, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button so that we can keep bringing you amazing content. First found in 2020, this 400-year-old wooden ship was found at the bottom of the River Trave, insanely well preserved. Researchers say that since wood rots so quickly underwater in this region, they were surprised at how much of the ship remained intact. The ship is believed to be a single-masted cargo vessel between 20 and 25 meters long, and sunk standing almost completely upright. Around 150 wooden cargo barrels were found in the wreck that were filled with quicklime, an ingredient for mortar used in stonework made from burning limestone. Because of this specialized cargo, scientists believe that the ship was sailing from Scandinavia to regions of northern Germany that don't have any limestone. Marine researchers have been amazed at how well preserved the ship is, and they believe this is due to a layer of mud that happened to cover it when it finally rested on the bottom of the river. The mud kept the wood from rotting, but it also protected it from a type of saltwater clam known as the shipworm, which is very, very good at destroying submerged wood. Research and underwater excavations are still ongoing, and the team even believes that they may find remains of some of the long-lost crew that was aboard when the ship met its final resting place. Number 8. Found in the foliage. In 1980, 69-year-old Paul L. went for a walk in the forest near the town of Bruckberg. He did not tell anyone where he was going, but he left a farewell note for his family as he knew that this would be his last walk. His family searched for years, but he was never found. And in 2009, a teenage boy was walking through the same forest and noticed something strange, a bone lying on the ground. And after he brought it to the attention of the police, law enforcement did a thorough search of the area and discovered a skeleton 11 meters off the ground in a spruce tree. This chilling find is only amplified by the fact that both the body and a pistol were tied to the same tree. Police investigators believe that Paul L. climbed the tree, tied himself to it, and took his own life. And this is what made the body so difficult to find. I mean, who looks for a skeleton in a tree? Number 7. German Stonehenge. Most of us know about Stonehenge, a prehistoric monument in England consisting of circles made with...
As a father who works full-time, I want to be an example to show them that even though education and your dreams can be difficult to achieve, it's worth pursuing that goal. This is my comeback. Start
massive stone slabs. No one's 100% sure who made it or what it was used for other than rituals, but it's not the only place of its kind in the world. In 1991, a plane was flying towards Berlin and someone noticed a strange structure below. When people went to investigate, they discovered this henge. It consists of concentric circles made out of massive wooden poles. The largest of the circles measures 115 meters or 380 feet, which actually makes it larger than England's Stonehenge. Archaeologists have since found multiple burial sites containing the remains of men and women of all ages who appear to have died in a sort of ritual sacrifice, some of which appear to be quite brutal. Weapons such as axes, along with drinking vessels and butchered animal bones, were also found at the site. However, new excavations have found evidence of settlements as well, implying that not only was this place used for rituals and solstice celebrations, but also as a place for locals to live. Number 6. Stashed secrets. In August of 2021, a history teacher was cleaning and making repairs to his aunt's house in Hagen after there had been severe flooding damage. When he removed a piece of rotted board, he found a small, 1-foot wide hidden area, and inside he saw a newspaper dated in 1945. When he continued to look further, he discovered many German military artifacts from World War II, including a portrait of the mustached leader of Germany, brass knuckles, a revolver, military patches, and many, many letters and documents. It's believed that the house was once the local headquarters for the National Socialist People's Welfare Organization, or the NSV at the time, which was in charge of doling out the riches stolen from Jewish groups and individuals during the war. In other words, a safe house for bad guys. But the family says that they had no idea the history of the building when they purchased it in the 60s. Things were so haphazardly thrown and hidden in the wall that researchers believe that it must have been done in quite a hurry when the Allied troops closed in on the city. With no time to dispose of the important documents, they hid them in the walls, making for quite a discovery 76 years later. Number 5. Reused graves. In August of 2022, archaeologists were doing a preventative dig at the site of a newly planned rainwater retention basin in Tuttlingen and came across a late Stone Age culture grave dating back to 3000 BC. While no human remains from that era have been found, the other items in the burial site imply that they were graves, mostly the pottery made from broken ceramic indicative of that time period, which would have been adorned with textures and pictures for the dead. However, there was another discovery made shortly after, in the same spot. More items were uncovered by archaeologists, including swords, jewelry, and drinking glasses, but this time they were from the Middle Ages, around 500 AD. That's right, a medieval gravesite on top of one from the Stone Ages, meaning that this same burial ground was used again 3,500 years after it was the first time. Excavation is still ongoing, so who knows what else they'll find. Number 4. The Unicorn Cave Carving. Deep in the Harz Mountains lies the Einhornhöhle, or the Unicorn Cave. It got its name from treasure hunters who thought that the remains they discovered there were those of the mythological animal, when most likely they were something else entirely, the bones of a prehistoric giant deer. In 2014, researchers discovered a 51,000-year-old art piece carved into the toe bone of a species of deer that existed during the Ice Age. Originally thought to be butchering marks, further experiments showed that the marks made were intentional, and that the bone had most likely been boiled first to make it softer and easier to carve. This shows how early on humans were creating what could be called art, with the detailing being deliberate and complex, and it's a tragedy that so much of this has been lost to time. The story goes back even further, because what researchers found near the same area in 1990 will shock you. Number 3. Hominin weaponry. Before the bone carving was found, archaeologists were already uncovering nearby sites, and in 1990 they discovered something truly remarkable. Perfectly preserved weapons, artifacts, and bones were uncovered that were approximately 300,000 years old, and that is absolutely insane to me. Ancient throwing sticks, push lances, and other tools were found, some of which scientists have yet to still divine the function of. Closer examination showed how the weapons had worn from use, and that told researchers what they were used for and how often. There were even marks in some of them that seemed to have been made from chipping bone. Now, who knows if that was from an animal or another early human? It's almost impossible to tell. But the fact that these exist at all is amazing to me. Number 2, the Headless Horse, man. The legend of the Headless Horseman is well known around the world, and many cultures have their own version of the story of a headless rider on a dark horse come to do evil. But in Germany, they seem to have gotten it mixed around. In an ancient cemetery near Knittlingen, archaeologists revealed a perplexing discovery. In a 1,400-year-old grave, there was a man buried, and next to him was a horse that was missing its head. Further searching in the surrounding area showed that many of the graves
Care. It's been the heart of our mission for more than 25 years. If you need health insurance or if your coverage is changing, Fidelis Care can help. Call 1-888-FIDELIS, TTY 711, or visit fideliscare.org.
Graves had jewelry like pearl necklaces and bracelets, as well as everyday goods like food stored in ceramic pots buried alongside the bodies. This led researchers to believe that they were not sacrifices or offerings, but a gift to be used in the afterlife. And the gifts you were given depended on your status. And since this man was buried alongside most of a horse, it would imply that the man who rested there was of great esteem, and perhaps even owned that horse. and can now ride with them in the afterlife. Either way, headless skeletons of any kind are creepy. We all know of the dark and terrible things that occurred in Germany during World War II, but our number one dark discovery came right at the end of the war. When Allied troops entered the town of Dachau, they thought that they were ready for anything, whether that was German officers ready to fight or booby traps laid by Axis forces, but nothing could compare them for what they saw when they entered the camp. But before they even entered the camp, soldiers were put off by a foul odor. They believed that they were upwind of some sort of chemical factory, but they soon discovered what was known as the death train, where bodies of thousands of innocent people were laid with no regard to their dignity. These people had their lives taken for absolutely no reason, and when they were discovered, soldiers forced members of the German army and other sympathizers to help give them a proper burial. With the arrival of the Allied troops in Dachau and the liberation of the camp and its survivors, the war was all but won, and the evil German leader took his own life the next day. The dark history of the camp can still be felt by visitors to this day and helps people learn of the worst of humanity and the best of humanity who fought to keep the evils at bay.
Number 10. An odd man in the woods. I was a park ranger on a small island, the only year-round resident. I loved the off-season with 400 acres all to myself, no phone, no internet. I was in the old forest one night when I saw a smear of bright white off trail ahead. I figured it was one of the small herd of white-rumped deer, but it moved up the side of the trail before I could get a better look. I heard a sharp bark and froze, then crept forward a few feet. I reached the fork and was straining to see ahead when I heard the crunch and crack of something in the brush behind me. I spun and saw a pale man, 6 foot or taller, with dark hair, wearing a bright white t-shirt about 30 feet in front of me. He gave me a lunatic grin, barked again, a hard, sharp ha, then turned and ran off into the woods. I stood still, scanning the trees, my hand on my weapon. After not hearing anything for a few moments, I backtracked my way to the main trail, then, terrified, sped walked all the way back to my cabin. I don't know who or what it could have been. The way he was running around off the trail convinced me that he knew the island very well, better than me for sure, and that he was hiding out somewhere, but I never found any evidence of a secret lair, and I never saw him again. Number 9. Small humanoid creature. This happened about 8 years ago when I was 21 years old and working as a camp counselor in New York State. The place is basically a bunch of cabins in the woods on top of a mountain, each cabin half a mile apart from the other, so you're pretty isolated in the woods. One night at about 1 a.m., I was sneaking off to meet my camp girlfriend. Suddenly, I heard rustling in the woods and I stopped to investigate it. There are bears/other animals, so I was expecting something like that. Then this 3-foot-tall humanoid type thing suddenly jumps out of the bushes and looks at me. It's too dark for me to make out any of its features other than it was standing on 2 feet, had 2 arms, and basically looked just like a miniature person without any features. I was curious to what it was, so I started walking towards it and it spooked, bolting back into the woods. I'll never forget how mechanical it looked as it took off running. I have never seen anything on 2 legs run that quickly, so I was pretty confused about what it was. As much as I try to make sense of it, I still to this day have no idea what it was. It was very human, but too short to be a human, and I don't know how a human could run that fast anyway. Now, I feel like this could have been some sort of animal perhaps, but it's still creepy. Number 8. Crying baby. My grandfather used to be the equivalent of a park ranger down in Mexico. He was in charge of patrolling the farms and lands mainly due to people growing illegal substances. One day, he said he was patrolling this ranch late at night shift and he heard a baby crying. Now the land is pretty flat, so he looked all ways and saw nothing. He thought maybe it was some goats out in the far as they can sound like crying babies, but as he's walking his route, he hears the same sound, looks up in the sky, and swears he saw a witch with black clothing and everything flying towards a mountain. He panicked, ran to his car, and drove off as fast as he could. Now, this could have been a bird or something, but being alone at night outside, your mind can definitely play tricks on you. Number 7. The blue lights. I used to work as a ranger at Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. There's a place on the ranch called Urica Mesa, and there's all sorts of local legends about it being haunted. One of the stories about the mesa is that at night you can see weird lights coming from the top. I've been there for 4 summers and even camped on top of the mesa and had never seen one until one night. A scout troop and I were camped on the back side of the mesa. I hadn't told them any of the haunted stories at this point when one of the kids points up to the mesa and asks, "What's that?" I figured he's seeing some flashlight coming down the trail from the mesa because I know there's supposed to be another group camping with us, so I tell him that. I turn to look and the lights weren't coming from where the trail is, they were off to the right and it's not a flashlight. It's like the light was coming from behind the mesa or from a fire that you can't see. Only it wasn't orange-red like firelight, it was blue. Creepiest thing ever because if the blue lights are real, what else is real? At this point though, I'm still thinking it's the other group, but like 15 minutes later, they roll into camp and we can still see the lights. Spooky. Number 6. Perfectly severed deer head found on trail. Ugh. I'm a ranger at Yellowstone. A couple weeks ago, I was exploring the Lamar Valley, about 11 miles from the nearest road and even further to the park boundary. There, in the middle of the trail, is a perfectly severed deer head. No blood, no raggedness at the severance. Perfectly intact. Now, this is weird because I have seen wolf and bear spoils, and I used to find cougar prey remains in SD with radio tracking just after the cougar made them. This was not any of those things. The head was completely uneaten, eyes, tongue, everything intact. Even the ravens hadn't touched it yet. No catching, no droppings. Right smack in the middle of the trail, but again, no blood. Even a human doing it made no conventional sense. It was a doe, so it had no antlers, plus why leave it in the trail? Whole thing, even in broad daylight, gave me the chills. Just an ocean of waving grass, bison calmly grazing, and a perfectly clear deer head on the path. Now, this sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, and I am terrified. Number 5. Dead body. I was a wildland firefighter, specifically a hotshot for the US Department of Agriculture. We saw a lot of backcountry in national forests that no one ever saw. Once, on a fire in South California, we helicoptered deep into the woods, then hiked 8 or so miles. We were way out when we discovered human remains, clothes, etc. We opened the wallet and find a note, then found the thing he used with 1 bullet missing. We examined the skull and discovered the guy used it on himself. Very creepy in person. A crew flew out and investigated, piecing together his ID and missing person reports. They discovered he'd been out there for more than a decade. Number 4. Abandoned tent. The oddest thing was the abandoned camp next to the trail. Camping outside of designated campsites is a big no-no, and I was surprised as one day I was walking and found a tent set up directly next to the trail. The trail ran along a nice stream and was a very tranquil spot. Inside, I found a cloth sleeping bag, some dirty clothes, lots of food, big cans of SpaghettiOs, and what looked like some leftovers from a refried beans and rice dinner, and a teddy bear. Everything reeked of cigarette smoke. I was reluctant to confiscate everything and leave the individual out there with nothing, but I did take all the food and pack it into a secure food storage box. I left a note explaining where I had taken the food and that they needed to move camp. Now, I was unable to return to the tent for 2 weeks, way too long to leave it sitting there next to the trail. It was basically untouched when I returned. Some trail crew folks had checked it out and let me know, but that was probably it. I packed up the rest and hauled it out. I spent some time poking around in the area, but never saw any other signs of life. It was obviously someone who was not prepared for camping out in the backcountry, judging by the food, equipment, and the teddy bear. I just don't know. Everything, clothing, gear, etc. indicated it was just one individual. Number 3. Moving light. Park ranger here. Another ranger and I were out on a search and rescue call once. The missing person was a man in his 20s. He had gone hiking and had not returned the day that he intended to. When we got the call, it was nighttime, but we hiked a few miles and set up camp on a ridge that had a pretty good view. He had gone into the woods prepared, so we decided to wait until daylight before beginning the search. About 2 a.m., I get up and I am peeing when I see a moving light at the base of the cliffs across the valley a few miles away. Looks like a flashlight beam. I tell the other ranger and we make the decision to keep waiting for daylight. The next morning, we decide to check it out in the area and bring this guy home. We got to approximately where I saw the light the night before and started calling his name. Soon, we find his body at the base of the cliff. He had fallen 60 feet on his head. The body was badly mangled. We radioed back that it has now become a recovery discovery instead of a rescue. At this point, the other ranger yells at me to come look at this. Lying 20 feet from the man's body was his mag light. It seemed odd, but I thought nothing of it until the other ranger reminded me of the light the night before. It kinda gave me the creeps, but I still dismissed it. Before too long, the coroner arrived and inspected the body. After he took the body back to the lab, he said that the man had been dead for at least 48 hours before we found the body. All of a sudden, the oh crap alarm went off in my brain. I knew that it couldn't be possible. I had the coroner review his work, same results. I tried to find an explanation for the light I had seen, perhaps other hikers, but one search and rescue guy had stayed at the only trailhead in the area all night. No one had come or gone. To this day, I have no clue what I saw that night, but it freaked me out. Number 2. The mysterious stranger. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle schoolers and had one co-instructor. We were camping out on the top of the mountain and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. I laid on a hammock enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in this area, so I perked up. As I got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man survey our camp. I could really only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do. I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey the camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came up on. To this day, I have no idea what that was all about, and it freaks me out. That freaks me out too. And coming in at number 1, search for hikers runs through super creepy clearing. There was a group that hadn't been heard from after their scheduled return from a camping trip. A coworker and I headed out in the general direction the group had set off in. We'd been hiking for most of the day and seen nothing. We're about 35 kilometers into the woods at this point, and we start noticing odd things. Sticks carved like spears stuck into the ground, weird carvings in the trees, a children's stuffed animal hanging from a noose up in a tree. This place was nowhere near any roads. It wasn't on regular trails people would go on in the area. The really eerie thing was that everything was freshly carved. Somebody had been there within a couple of hours of us and made these things. I noticed a bit of a shirt that had caught on a small tree and ripped along with some shoe prints. We were thinking, great, maybe we're close to the group, when a radio call comes in though. The group had been found 20 kilometers east of us and they're calling everyone back. So what did we find? I have no clue, but my coworker and I headed out of those woods fast, and yeah, I would too.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the mass grave. Last year in 2021, archaeologists who were excavating the ruins of Chan Chan, which was once the capital of the Chimu Empire, they stumbled upon a mass grave that held the remains of 25 people. Most of the skeletons were that of a woman, and they are said to have been wrapped in a sort of cotton fabric before being wrapped in a material made of plant tissue. Some of the women were even placed in a seated position with their legs bent, some with needles, chalk, and sewing objects placed near them. There were also quite a few ceramic objects found in the grave as well. The abundance of artifacts found here has led researchers to believe that these people were considered elite members of the society. The empire that these people are believed to have belonged to was one that is said to have fallen to the Inca sometime between 1465 and 1470. In our number 9 spot today, we have the 500-year-old tomb. Just over a month ago at the end of June, scientists unearthed an Inca-era tomb that laid underneath a home in Peru's capital, Lima. The tomb is said to be at least 500 years old, and the lead archaeologist of the discovery team said that it contained, quote, multiple funerary bundles. This tomb is said to likely be holding the elite from the time, and the current owner of the home the tomb was found under was absolutely bursting with pride. He explained that he hoped that the find would create a better appreciation for the rich history around all of those who live in the area. The find only came because the owner of the home was planning on some new building things. Because of this, there was a required archaeological survey, and thank goodness for that. clearly. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Nazca Lines. If you were to head to the Nazca Desert, just about 200 miles southeast of Lima in southern Peru, you'd find the most famous geoglyphs in the world, the Nazca Lines. Researchers believe that these lines might be something like 2 millennia old, and other than how they are incredible works of art, they are completely baffling. The geoglyphs are more than 800 long white lines etched into the desert, as well as 300 geometric shapes and 70 different animal figures. The biggest shape stretches about 1,200 feet across, which leads to my point about why these lines are so incredibly fascinating. These images can only be fully seen from high above in the air. So thinking back 2,000 years ago, how did humans make these without the vantage points we have now? I'm not exactly sure, but it is definitely nothing shy of amazing. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Paleo Burrow. Back in 2010, a geologist named Amilcar Adami heard rumblings of an insanely impressive cave that was located in Brazil. He knew he had to check it out, and after asking around a bit, he eventually found out the location of it. When he first arrived, while he was absolutely shocked at what he found, because he was unable to contact the owner of the land, he wasn't able to fully inspect the cave. The reason the cave was so interesting was because of the fact that he could tell it wasn't created by some sort of geological process. Finally, in 2015, he was able to return to the cave for study, and this is when it was realized that this was the first paleo burrow ever discovered in the Amazon. Seeing the strange features of the cave as well as what looked like claw marks on the ceiling, it became clear that this cave was created by generations of some sort of gigantic, ancient, burrowing creature. It is believed that the animal responsible for these caves is an extinct species of ground sloth that grew to be 15 feet tall and was 5,000 pounds. It's an incredible discovery that unveiled even more than what might have met the eye. In our number 6 spot today, we have Machu Picchu. Perhaps one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in South America, this incredible and stunning site was built over 500 years ago, and it was once known as the lost city of the Inca. Our modern discovery of this site came in 1911 when the archaeologist Hiram Bingham and his team stumbled upon it almost accidentally while looking for another ancient city. The stones used to create this site weighed over 50 tons, and it certainly doesn't have a location that would have been convenient to its construction. Through earthquakes and all of the terrible weather that the Earth has seen in the last 500 some years, Machu Picchu remains, and that is a testament to how brilliant their work really was. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Inca mummies. In 1976, researchers found 2 mummies at a burial site in northern Chile. These 2 corpses belonged to 2 young women who were the victims of human ritual sacrifice. It is likely that the sacrifice they were a part of was one that was carried out by the Inca to commemorate either historical or political events, or as a response to a natural disaster. The mummies were found wearing silver ornaments, and they were surrounded by ceramic vessels, and they were wearing red robes. The red in the Inca clothing was often created using hematite or other iron oxides, but upon further inspection of these mummies, it was revealed that their red clothing held something much more dangerous. The dye used for their clothing contained cinnabar, which is a mineral rich in mercury. This was often used in the ancient world as a pigment for makeup, clothing, and paint, but handling it leads to mercury poisoning. What is strange is that researchers believe that the toxicity of cinnabar was known in ancient Peru, so we aren't exactly sure why they used it in the first place, but it's thought that it might have been used as protection against grave robbers. In our number 4 spot today, we have Puma Punku. This site is located in Bolivia, and it boasts a series of stone structures. One of the most notable and remarkable things about this site is how precisely the stones here were cut. It is believed that this site dates back to somewhere around 536 AD, and while it now lay in ruins, it is thought to have once been an incredibly wondrous place filled with things like polished metal plaques, bright ceramics, and a bunch of different fabrics. It isn't quite known exactly what this site was used for entirely, partly because of its age, but also because of the lack of written record and the deterioration that can be seen at the site. Because of the impressive size of the site, as well as the technology that was used to build it, this is a place that many people often say was built by aliens, but it was actually just the Incas. They were incredibly talented craftsmen, and just because we couldn't pull it off today doesn't mean we should take their credit away. In our number 3 spot today, we have Whale Hill. In 2010, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, some road work was being done when the fossils and bones of 40 whales were found among the remains of other marine animals. Remember, this is in the desert and about 40 meters above sea level, so How is this even possible? I feel like I could totally understand like maybe a few fish, but 40 whales, some dolphins, seals, and swordfish? Something strange certainly must have been at play. Like I'm sure many of you are thinking, maybe the remains were from a time when the sea was once there, but unfortunately that too has been debunked. It isn't exactly clear what happened here, but the belief is that these animals may have consumed some kind of toxic plant or algae and somehow ended up washing ashore only to pass away in this location. In our number 2 spot today we have Sacsayhuaman. This site is located in Cusco, Peru, and it is another fascinating and seemingly impossible stone structure that was built by the Incas. This structure was once believed to have been a fortress, but now it is believed it may have actually been used for things like ceremonies. Why this is another incredible creation is because of the fact that we can't quite figure out how it could have been built. The stones in the structure fit together so perfectly that they're able to stay together without anything holding them in place, and they've done so for years and years. This, coupled with how large some of the stones were, is enough to completely stump experts. Despite how well the stones all fit together, apparently they all have different shapes, which has led researchers to believe that the building design was kind of made up as the structure was being built. Imagine that, improvising building a structure and it lasts for hundreds of years and goes on to stump humanity for a while. I'm just saying, this is pretty cool. It becomes more and more apparent how talented and brilliant the Inca really were. In our number 1 spot today we have the sacrificial offerings. In 2018, researchers sent some remote operated robots beneath the ground in Peru at an archaeological site. These robots stumbled on more than anyone ever imagined when they found a network of 35 interlocked underground tunnels dating back 3,000 years. This was already an unbelievable discovery, but it turned dark when inside these tunnels, the team found a bunch of human remains. While finding a mass amount of remains would be a terrifying experience, there were 3 skeletons that stood out from the rest. They specifically stood out because they weren't like the others. They weren't the skeletons of people who had a high social standing, which almost all of the others appeared to be. These remains they found were from people who were sacrificed in rituals. They were able to determine this because of the fact that these bodies were found face down under piles of rocks, which is of course not how people of a high social standing would have been buried at this time. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the vanishing remains. It's been over 30 years since the Titanic wreck was found, and recently scientists have made another startling discovery. As it turns out, the remains of the wreckage don't have much time left. As we speak, they are currently vanishing. The ocean liner, which is over 100 years old, has not only been beaten by the currents of the deep sea, but the main culprit for its deterioration is an iron-hungry bacteria that consumes hundreds of pounds of iron a day. This bacteria, which has been named Halomonas titanicae, is likely going to render the ship completely eroded by 2030. This means that researchers who want to discover more about the Titanic really are racing against time to get down there and see all that they can before the remains are gone, and the story of the Titanic remains just that. In our number 9 spot today, we have portholes. Since the Titanic sunk, people have been trying to figure out exactly how this unsinkable ship sank and how it sank so quickly. A recent study may have found a previously undiscussed scenario that likely contributed to the speed of the sinking ship greatly. On that fateful day, of course, the Titanic grinded to a halt, and at that point the passengers had no idea why. This led to many of them opening up the portholes in the ship to get a look out in case they could see anything that would be stopping them from continuing on their journey. Many of those who opened the portholes didn't close them after, and with every open porthole that went underwater, it is estimated that it doubled the size of the damage to the ship. It is possible that these open windows may have caused the ship to sink at double the rate it would have had those windows been closed. Of course, this is not to blame the passengers, however, as this tragedy is certainly not their fault. In our number 8 spot today, we have the brittle fracture. This is another one of those theories behind how the Titanic found itself at the bottom of the North Atlantic. There was an expedition down to the wreckage of the Titanic recently, and it revealed something interesting about the hull of the ship. There were these large pieces of steel that were recovered, each with about 3 rivet holes 1.25 inches in diameter. These pieces revealed that the hull's iron rivets failed to brittle fracture, which is the sudden and rapid snapping. This means that there was a failure in the structural materials, and this usually happens as a result of low temperature, high impact loading, and high sulfur content, all 3 of which were present on the night of the tragedy. The water temperature was below freezing, the Titanic was traveling at a high speed upon impact with the iceberg, and the hull steel contained high levels of sulfur. These chunks of metal gave researchers one of the main answers as to why the Titanic sunk that night. In our number 7 spot today, we have rich remains. When we think of the story of the Titanic, we of course think of the sinking of the ship. We talk about how the survivors were saved, and then of course we think of the catastrophic loss of life. Many people don't stop to ask what happened with all of those who passed away in the tragedy, however. More than 1,500 people passed away in the sinking of the Titanic, and only 337 bodies were pulled from the water. A scholar named Jess Beer has recently examined what was done with those bodies, and throughout this research they have come to realize that whether or not these people got identified and what happened to the remains in the end all depended on their class and economic standing in life. About 1/3 of the recovered bodies ended up being returned to the sea because rescuers didn't think that they would get any sort of life insurance payout from the families of those who had passed and who were of a lower economic standing. For any bodies to be preserved for land burial, the remains had to be easily identifiable, and they needed to have a quote economic value even after death, with a high social or economic worth. In our number 6 spot today, we have the unidentified passenger. Until about 10 years ago, there were human remains that were recovered from the Titanic sinking that were unidentified despite researchers' best efforts. Initially, there was one identity that they thought they could link the body to, but there were also 5 other identities on the table, and no one was sure how to confirm who this person really was. A little over a decade ago, however, using mitochondrial DNA testing, the re-examining of the DNA gave a 98.87% certainty the unknown person was in fact a passenger named Sidney Goodwin. A man named Ryan Parr is heavily credited with helping bring this mystery to a close, although he insists it couldn't have been done without the help of numerous researchers and scientists who also worked to reveal this passenger's true identity. In our number 5 spot today, we have family ties. Lorraine Allison was just 2 years old when she boarded the Titanic with her family, her parents, and her brother. At the time of the sinking, it is said that Lorraine's brother was rushed to a lifeboat, but that the other 3 members of the family had passed in the tragedy. Despite this, only Lorraine's father's body was found, which led to the question of what happened to Lorraine and her mother. 28 years later, a woman named Helen Kramer came forward and said that she, in fact, was the missing Lorraine. Of course, people were skeptical and weren't willing to believe this, but until her death in 1992, Helen continued to claim that she was, in fact, Lorraine. After her passing, her granddaughter, Debrina Woods, resurfaced the claims by saying that she had inherited more evidence from her grandmother and that the truth should be told. Finally, a group of Titanic researchers, with the power of modern science, decided that they all wanted to solve this mystery once and for all. They did this by convincing descendants from each family to take a DNA test, and once this was done, they were able to prove that there was no relationship between the two. They were finally able to put this long-disputed claim to rest officially. In our number 4 spot today, we have the telegraph. So you know how people often explain that perhaps many more people would have been saved from the Titanic wreck if the nearby SS Californian had their telegraph operator awake when the distress call was sent? For the man who went to sleep, that's a heavy burden to bear for the rest of your life, but a recent study suggests that even if he was awake, there likely wouldn't have been anything that he could have done. Firstly, there wasn't any rule stating that this guy needed to be awake for 24 hours to man the telegraph machine, so right here, he is off the hook. This study, however, suggests that even if he was awake and the ship received the distress call, the ice around the Titanic was so thick they likely wouldn't have been able to get through to save the passengers either way. Turns out that this disaster really just had the perfect recipe for tragedy. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Titanic radio. This is a piece of the ship that has not yet been recovered, but it's the focus of much debate on whether or not it should be retrieved from the wreckage. Known in 1912 as the Marconi wireless telegraph machine, the radio on the Titanic sent distress calls to nearby ships that ended up saving the lives of 700 people in lifeboats. Despite how many people died in the Titanic tragedy, there were debates about whether or not to retrieve the artifact because of the fact that there might still be remains located in the same area as the radio is. Lawyers have argued against the recovery of the radio because the dive plan did not include the prospect of there being human remains located down there. It also was argued because in order to retrieve it, they would need to cut into the ship's radio compartment, which was strongly opposed by preservation advocates. As of right now, it does appear as though the dive to retrieve the radio will still occur, but of course the pandemic delayed things quite a bit, so at this point it isn't exactly clear when. This radio would be a very valuable artifact, but it also would hold an eerie tale of exactly when and how the radio was used during the final moments of the Titanic. In our number 2 spot today, we have the inspection card. This inspection card once belonged to a woman named Marion Meanwell. What could possibly be worrisome about an inspection card? Well, it shows how Marion was not intended to be on the Titanic, but by some turn of events, she unfortunately found herself as one of the passengers. The card shows that she was originally meant to be traveling on a ship called the Majestic. For some reason, the trip she originally had planned was delayed, and she instead was assigned to the ill-fated Titanic. You can see that the word Majestic was crossed out on her card, which shows us the change in plans. If only people were able to see what was about to strike, and they could have warned her. If Marion's body was ever recovered, unfortunately, she has never been identified. In our number 1 spot today, we have the bell. The bell from the crow's nest of the Titanic was recovered from the wreckage and returned to land, where it now resides in the Titanic Museum. The eerie story behind this bell is that it would have been the one that was rung 3 times by the lookout Frederick Fleet in order to attempt to warn of the iceberg that was ahead. Frederick, as well as the other lookout who was with him, Reginald Lee, both ended up thankfully surviving the incident and went on to later explain what happened from their point of view. They explained that if they had been given binoculars to assist with their job, they could have seen the iceberg sooner. When asked how much sooner, Frederick replied, quote, "Well, enough to get out of the way."
At number 10, we have an octopus nursery. 8-legged alien-looking things with suction cups all over their arms and beaks for mouths. Octopus are creepy-looking things, and to top it all off, they can camouflage like a Navy SEAL, and they are super smart. If these are the kind of things that make your skin crawl, then just running into one of these guys would probably freak you out. Well, on the underwater expedition at the Davidson Seamount, there was a rather shocking discovery. They had a remote probe that was on the ocean floor around 10,000 feet, and they came across which seemed to be an octopus that was next to not just one, not just two, but a group of 1,000 octopuses in a nursery. They were all there laying their eggs and using the heat from the volcanic vent to keep them warm. I would hate to be the guy who accidentally steps into that crack and then gets devoured by thousands of sticky arms. But if you're at 10,000 feet underwater, you probably are already screwed. At number 9, we have the Siberian lake monster. Of course, if we're doing a list of scary things that live underwater, we have to throw a giant mysterious sea monster on here. What separates the Siberian lake monster from other more popular guys that we have seen like Loch Ness and that kind of stuff is that underwater scans have actually picked this guy up. This thing is deep in Lake Labingcure, and some radar has shown that it looks like a 33-foot long creature is living there. Now this is probably just a skeleton, but if this thing is dead, it means that there was once a giant man-eating monster in this lake. I thought we were supposed to be safe in freshwater. They've nicknamed this thing the Devil, so you know he's a good time and loves company. So next time you go up to the cottage and you're swimming in the water and you feel safe, remember there might be a giant monster lurking underneath the water, ready to turn you into a side dish. At number 8, we have the Blue Hole. Now there are several blue holes in the world. There's one in Belize, there's one in the Red Sea, there's a giant one in my heart that was left there from when Reboot ended on a cliffhanger. How are you going to end a show that so many people fell in love with on a cliffhanger? I will never trust again. Well, this one is between Cape Verde and the Caribbean islands. Scientists are really confused about this thing. It's a crack in the bottom of the ocean floor and is several thousand miles long. What's strange about this is there's no explanation of how this happened. It might have been tectonic plates moving around, but when this happened, the Earth will probably start to repair itself, and there's been no sign of this. My theory is this is where Godzilla goes to sleep at night. I mean, it seems like the most logical answer. It's either that or the gateway to hell. Like, come on guys, I'm doing real science work here. At number 7, we have the Yonaguni Complex. This was discovered by scuba divers in the 1980s. I think that's the scariest part about this one. Could you imagine going scuba diving back in the 80s? The technology back then must have been a tube going up to some guy who would blast fresh air down to you using a bicycle pump. I don't even think they had decompression sickness figured out back then. The chances of you coming up the bends was probably super high. Well, if it wasn't for a few divers in Japan who were willing to sacrifice it all to look at some cool stuff, we wouldn't know anything about the Yonaguni Complex. It's still a mystery as to what this thing is. It looks like some temples that might have existed thousands of years ago, but when the Ice Age decided to melt, it would have covered this entire area. This could be why an entire civilization got plunged underwater. Or the temple could have been on a cliff, and then when a massive earthquake hit, it knocked the temple into the water. But like everything in life, there are some haters who say this whole thing is just a natural rock formation. Some people just want to ruin everything. At number 6, 6, we have Anacora Cista Twista. One of the reasons why the underwater world is such a mystery is because we find things like this in there. Sure, there are beautiful things down there like bright fish and chubby marine mammals, but there's also the unknown, unidentified organisms like Anacora Cista Twista, which should be the name of an 80s hair metal band. But what is this thing? Well, it's a protist. And what is a protist, you may ask? Well, it's an organism that doesn't belong to any animal group, fungus, or plant group. What does that mean? I really have no idea, you guys. I think it means it could be an alien. Some alien came down to Earth for a swim and then scraped its knee on some coral, and now we have alien creatures running around the ocean, probably waiting for you to pee so it can swim up your pee hole and then work its way into your brain. It's really the only logical answer. At number 5, we have the Bimini Road. How were the pyramids made? Was it aliens coming down to share their technology and secrets with us? Or was it just thousands upon thousands of slaves who sacrificed their lives and their spines to build them? Well, we don't know and we may never know, but the Bimini Road is another one of these mysteries. It's off the coast of the Bahamas, and it looks like it could have been a pathway that was placed perfectly with giant slabs of rock. Similar to the way the pyramids were made, it seems that these large slabs of rock were too large to be moved by man, and also like the pyramids, these giant slabs were also perfectly placed so well. So where does everyone's mind go when something like this happens? Well, magic or aliens. The logical answer is that this is a natural phenomenon of the water moving and hitting the rocks to make these formations, but people think that this was made using advanced technology from aliens and could have been the road to Atlantis. Honestly, I like the Atlantis theory much better. It's more fun. At number 4, we have colossal squid. Yeah, this thing is a big no thanks for me. So everyone always talks about how there might be sea monsters out there, but this thing actually exists. There's never been one caught alive, but several have washed onto shores dead, and they are massive. The largest one ever discovered was 45 feet long, and it was dead. So you know there was an even bigger one out there that killed this guy. They don't even have suckers on their tentacles, they have hooks. Let me say that again. This squid has 10 giant arms covered in hooks. This thing is straight out of a horror movie. Scientists aren't even sure what something this big eats. They think it probably feeds on whales or your deepest, darkest fears. I wouldn't be surprised if the colossal squid works part-time as a gatekeeper for hell. It makes me think that the old Greek stories about the Kraken might have been real. At number 3, we have underwater circles. Giant formations of circles that are formed underwater, and nobody knows how they got there. These mysteries were discovered off the coast of North Carolina, Florida, and Belize. Now, what are they? Like many things on this list, myself and the entire scientific community have no idea. But here are some theories. Maybe they were formed naturally by either two things, water currents or some sort of animal mating ritual. Another idea is that these things were made by ancient civilizations before the Ice Age. All these things would have been above ground and might have been art left over by some old-timey tribes. And the third theory is that they look kind of like a bullseye, so it might be some sort of nuclear missile target, and if you hit it hard enough, the explosion will cause some sort of major natural disaster like an earthquake or tsunami, or if we're lucky, both. At number 2, we have Megalodon. If you have a fear of sharks, you're gonna love this one. Megalodon was a prehistoric shark that was even bigger than the giant hooked tentacle beast that was earlier on this list. If you've already forgotten about the colossal squid, it clocked in at around 45 feet long, where Megalodon was closer to 60 feet long. It was a 60-foot shark that could probably rip a blue whale in half in one bite. Well, maybe not that, but it was still a gargantuan creature with teeth the size of Brock Lesnar's fists. This thing wouldn't even chew you. It would just swallow you whole and then fart your skeleton out into the dark, cold ocean. At number 1 on our list, we have Giant Eyeball. A mysterious giant eyeball washed onto the shore of a Florida beach back in October of 2012. I don't know any other kind of giant eyeball other than a mysterious one. There's no super common regular giant eyeball just lying around. But this is also Florida. This is the state where people smoke crack at weddings and kiss alligators on the lips, so maybe it's a little more common over there. Well, this giant eyeball was found by Gino Cavacci, and he didn't know what the hell to make of it, so he took it home and then stuck it in his freezer. Then he called the cops, and the cops came in and told him, "We don't do giant eyeballs on the beach. You have to call the wildlife people." And then he called the wildlife people, and they were like, "What the hell is that?" And he was like, "I don't know. I brought it to you guys to try and figure out what it is." And then some people were like, "Maybe it's a sea monster." And other people were like, "No, it's probably from a marlin." And I think in the end, no one really knew what the hell it was. But just so you know, there's giant eyeballs out there just laying around the beach sometime.
Number 10, haunted takeaway. This story comes from a cafe in Hong Kong that did a lot of delivery orders to customers' homes. One day they received an order for 4 meals and they brought it to the address they were given. The customer only opened the door a crack, sliding the money through and telling them to leave the food on the floor. When they checked the register that night, they discovered the money they were given had turned into hell money, which locals use to burn for use in the afterlife. This happened a few more days in a row, every time going to the same home and the money turning into hell money. Each time the customer would never fully open the door or reveal themselves. Finally, the owner decided to report it to the police, and when they entered the apartment, they discovered that the residents weren't actually alive, instead finding 4 dead bodies on the floor. They were able to tell that the bodies had been dead for a significant amount of time, but still had food in their stomachs from the cafe that was only recently digested. Number 9, sea monster. In 2018, tourists on a beach in Vietnam were shocked by an apparent sea monster that had washed up on shore. One person filming it and uploading it to YouTube for more people to see. The creature is incredibly strange looking, and to me it looks like a bundle of alien twigs or something. The tour guide themselves admitted that they had no idea if it was an animal, a plant, or even something alien. A lot of commenters believed that this was some sort of mysterious alien creature found on Earth, as no one had ever seen anything like it before. Many people speculating that it might be only in its early stages of development and could grow into something bigger and scarier. As it turns out, it's apparently just some sort of scary deep sea starfish, and they ended up returning it to the water. And I will honestly never get over how terrifying and alien looking some deep sea creatures are. Number 8, Seven Sisters Rock. This one is another one that comes from Hong Kong, and it's the story behind the Seven Sisters Road. The story goes that there was a group of 7 women who lived near the area, and together they took a vow of celibacy, which means never getting married or ever being physically intimate with someone. Through their pact, they became blood sisters. However, the third sister's family refused to go along with this and organized for her to be married off, preparing the ceremony. Because of their pact, the night before the wedding ceremony took place, all 7 women drowned themselves in the river. The villagers in the area were never able to find their bodies, but the next time the tide receded, they discovered 7 large boulders all in a row. As a result, they were named the Seven Sisters Rocks. Years later, a swimming space was built called the Seven Sisters Swimming Shed, but any late-night male swimmers there would end up drowning mysteriously, the 7 sisters reportedly haunting the space. Number 7, Haunted Tomb. Before I start this one, I am just gonna say yes, Israel is in Asia, and yes, I did have to Google that. Go easy on me, it's been a while since I last took a geography class. A group of researchers were doing excavations in an old cemetery in Israel when they discovered an ancient tomb. What shocked them the most, however, was the grave marker for a man named Jacob the Convert, who died around 1800 years ago. The inscription on the grave was written in human blood and was a warning that nobody should ever open the tomb, stating that anyone who does so would be cursed. What type of curse isn't detailed, but curses are typically never a good thing. The people who found it walled off the area with stones and halted their excavations. Getting cursed probably wasn't in their contract. Number 6, cursed balls. More cursed things from Israel. Let's take a look at this pair of cursed balls. And yes, I did pick this one because I think it's funny to say cursed balls. During excavation near the Israel border, archaeologists discovered these 2 ballista balls, which were basically ammunition for a big crossbow that fires rocks. A few years later, the balls went missing from the site, but unfortunately, nobody actually noticed. 20 years later, the balls were returned and found on the site once again, along with a note. The thief who stole them apparently had bad luck and believed that the balls were cursed. He said that when he brought the balls home, his successful business suddenly failed, his family abandoned him, he went into severe debt, and apparently many other issues. He didn't realize until it was too late that his bad luck was caused by a bunch of bad balls. So he returned the balls to the site, and we can only assume that his bad luck ended. Number 5, Ganjiam Asylum. Now let's swerve into a few buildings that were discovered to be apparently haunted. The first is Ganjigam Psychiatric Hospital in South Korea, touted as the most haunted place in the country. It was opened in 1982 but closed only 14 years later in 1996, being left empty and abandoned. The story goes that many of the patients at the hospital were disappearing mysteriously, people believing that the owner of the hospital was actually keeping them hostage there and treating them poorly, running away to America when the families and authorities started looking into it. The doctors there apparently became just as insane as the patients, and due to their tragic deaths and unfinished business, the angry spirits of the doctors and patients now haunt the broken down facility. Many urban explorers and ghost hunters report large amounts of paranormal activity and seeing apparitions of the patients within the halls. Number 4. Prince Gong's Mansion. Over in China, one of their most haunted locations is Prince Gong's Mansion, owned by an official of the Qing dynasty who was known to be incredibly corrupt. He lived there with his wife and his harem of around 80 ladies. One of his only redeeming factors was said to be his devotion to his wife. When she became incredibly sick after their son passed away, he did everything to try and figure out a way to cure her, including hiring monks to pray for her health. Unfortunately, they apparently discovered that she was dying of a broken heart, and this was unable to be cured by any method. So unfortunately, the woman would soon pass away. The mansion is now said to be haunted by her spirit, as well as other women that the prince was involved with. Most of the reports say that you can hear his wife crying late at night, and security guards have reported seeing apparitions of women in white dresses wandering through the halls. Number 3. Soccer team. This one was probably one of the most talked about news stories at the time, even worldwide, and you'll probably remember it once I start talking about it. Back in 2018, a group of British divers were in northern Thailand when they discovered an entire soccer team flooded and trapped over 2 miles inside of a cave. The soccer team had been led to the cave by their coach, who had visited there before. It was supposed to be only a quick expedition lasting around 2 hours, so they brought only flashlights, rope, and batteries, not any food or water. But when a monsoon hit, they became trapped inside, and 2 hours turned into 2 weeks, surviving off water dripping from a stalactite and chanting mantras in order to stay calm. Fortunately, all 12 players were rescued over the course of 3 days and survived, only one rescue team member losing their life in the effort. Number 2. Airplane Graveyard. One place to visit in Thailand that many people probably don't know about is this airplane graveyard. Starting in January of 2010, large scrapped airplanes just suddenly started showing up on a chunk of private property next to an auto body shop in Bangkok. In 5 years, many large planes were added to the graveyard, and soon after, it was discovered that 3 separate families had taken up residence within the planes. The planes are clearly broken down and have been stripped for their parts, making the site look like the eerie location of like a giant multiple plane crash. The families that live there use the planes as a source of income, taking the parts to be sold and making money off tourists who come to visit. Some of the planes include 2 Boeing 747s and 2 MD-82 jetliners. Gaining access to the property will run you around $5, so if you're in Thailand and interested in planes, maybe consider checking it out. Number 1. Hybrid Creature. And we are continuing to stay in Thailand for this final entry on the list, which is a strange creature found in a remote village that had people absolutely baffled. Footage of the creature shows it laid out on a table surrounded by people. It appears to be a young buffalo, but it has the skin and scales of a crocodile. Many people believing that a crocodile and buffalo somehow fell in love and created this hybrid creature, which died shortly after it was born, which is a pretty common occurrence for hybrid animals. The buffalo had previously birthed plenty of normal calves before, so they didn't think it could have been just some passed down genetic trait, truly believing it must be mixed with a crocodile. The villagers had it laid out on the table because they believed that the creature would bring them good luck. Whether or not it actually did, I'm not sure, and other people online believe that the whole thing was just a hoax.
Starting off this countdown, we have David Fravor. David Fravor is a U.S. Navy commander who spoke about some pretty terrifying things that he encountered underwater while working for the Navy. So according to him, twice while recovering spent practice munitions out of the water, he spotted a weird underwater object. first time, he saw a dark mass underwater. He described it as being a big mass that was kind of circular. He said he was certain that it wasn't a submarine. For the second sighting, he was retrieving a practice torpedo when this same weird thing sucked it down into the depths of the ocean. The torpedo was never seen again. So what was this big mass that he was seeing? In our ninth spot, we have the naval reports. After hearing David's interview, a 79-year-old woman contacted him. She said that her father was a naval officer, and when she was a child, her father showed her a telegram that stated that unidentified objects had been sighted going in and out of the water at one of their locations. The woman's father told her, and I quote, "We get these all the time, and it's always in the same area. But obviously, the Navy isn't going to release this information to the public." In our eighth spot today, we have the Sycamore Knoll. This is a weird underwater structure located close to Malibu. No one knows what it is, but it looks like a weird stadium-shaped structure, and it's located about 2,000 feet underwater. It's also massive. It's about 2.5 to 3 miles wide. It also has what appears to be pillars or columns supporting it up, and under there it looks like an entrance. One theory is that it's an underwater alien base. Crazy, I know. But a number of UFO sightings have been reported for years in that area. Some even claim to see UFOs landing in the waters in that exact area, and this was before the underwater structure was even discovered. Freaky, isn't it? What do you think it is though? Let me know in the comments below. In our seventh spot today, we have the unidentified object. Now, in case you were unaware, there's this whole theory that aliens live in underwater bases, and that's why a number of UFO sightings are by lakes, or people have seen these saucers rise up or into the lakes. Well, in 1970, biologist Ivan Sanderson published a book titled The Invisible Residents. In this book, he talked all about UFOs or USOs, unidentified submerged objects, aka UFOs that have been spotted going into the water or rising up out of it. According to this book, on April 19th, 1957, a crew member on board a Japanese fishing boat witnessed something very strange. He saw 2 metallic silvery objects descend from the sky and dive right down into the sea. He described them as being 10 meters long with no wings or anything. When the craft hit the water, it caused great waves and rocked their boat tremendously. So maybe the whole UFO, USO theory is true and they're living underwater. Who knows? In our sixth spot today, we have the gold. Did you know that $771 trillion worth of gold lies hidden in the ocean? Yes. You heard me. Wouldn't it be nice to just be swimming along and bump into some gold and become a millionaire? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. Ocean waters around the world contain about 20 million tons of gold in them. Each liter of water would contain approximately 13 billionths of a gram of gold. So you need to collect and filter an awful lot before becoming rich. And currently, there's no cost-effective method to remove the gold from seawater and be profitable. Now, people have tried. None have been successful. One case that I want to talk about has to do with a man named Ford Jerrigan. He came up with a plan for a gold accumulator. The plan was to extract gold from the Long Island Sound using a process involving mercury and electricity treatments. In fact, people thought that it was great, and before he knew it, he had investors, and he raised about $1 million for this project. But in the end, he scammed them all and fled with the money. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the giant sea monster. Now, if you watched my video on Google Earth, then you already have seen me talk about this. If you haven't, then, well, Google Earth basically caught a giant sea beast on their satellite camera. It was spotted off the coast of Antarctica's Deception Island. And no one, even scientists, don't know what it is. It could just be a whale, but it's still unconfirmed. Theories range from it being an underwater UFO to a kraken or another sea beast that we have yet to discover. To be honest, to me, it looks like a massive squid, but what do you think it is? Let me know in the comments below. In our 4th spot, we have the UFO video. More UFOs. Now, this was a leaked video showing what appears to be a UFO diving into the ocean. The video was filmed in 2019 off the coast of San Diego. Eventually, people were demanding answers, so the Pentagon eventually came forward saying that the video was authentic and that they don't know what the object is in the video. In the video, the object flies across the screen before stopping and slowly lowering itself into the water. Apparently, this was recorded by official Navy personnel. What do you think that could be? The Pentagon has no explanation for it yet. In our 3rd spot today, we have the plastic. The amount of plastic currently in our oceans is disgusting. Currently, 5.25 trillion macro and micro pieces of plastic are in our ocean. There's 46,000 pieces in every square mile of the ocean. Every day, around 8 million pieces of plastic make their way into our oceans. And guess what? Fish are eating them, and then we're eating these fish. So slowly, these microplastics are ending up in our bodies. But not just from fish. From bottled water, beer, honey, sea salt, and tea bags have all been exposed as microplastic carriers. We're killing marine life and ourselves, slowly but surely, and the governments are hardly addressing this issue. In our second spot, we have the nuclear waste. Bet you didn't know this, but our oceans are radioactive. Since 1952, low levels of radioactive waste have been discharged into the Irish Sea, the English Channel, and the Arctic Ocean. This radiation can enter the food chain through plankton, and then the fish eat the plankton, and then we eat the fish. In fact, radioactive cesium and plutonium have already been found in seals and porpoises. And
Ghirardelli chocolate chips makes baking a bite better.
it's getting worse. As the nuclear energy industry grows, more and more radioactive waste will be disposed of and find its way into our ground and water supply. Again, another scary thing the government doesn't address. And in our number one spot today, we have the secret underwater bases. Allegedly, the government has a number of secret underwater bases. They're just hidden from the public, so we don't know about them. We do know of one base though, and that's the Naval Testing Facility in Lake Bayview, Idaho. The lake that it's located in is 1,200 feet deep, and it is pretty remote, so it's deep and secluded enough to run these tests. If they have one there, who's to say they don't have more and in the ocean? Only time will tell.
Number 10. Abandoned car. A desert park ranger on Reddit shared a few of their stories that they had experienced while working. One that stands out is their discovery of a burned and abandoned car. When they received the report, they weren't too shocked, as it wasn't a rare occurrence that cars would be stolen and abandoned, occasionally being burned. When they found the vehicle, and as they waited for the fire department to arrive, they were left standing in shock, as it was clear that there was a body left in the front seat of the car. They discovered rope and other strange items in the car, and it was determined that the body had been tied up and killed. The police arrived, but no answers ever came about what had happened there, and they now refer to the area as the haunted site. Number 9. Abandoned sites. It's not uncommon to find abandoned campsites in the woods, but these rangers share their stories of the unique, strange, and scary things they found that made them stand out. The first was an abandoned house with a small shed hidden behind it. The shed had a large steel door which had been broken off its hinges when they found it. The windows had been boarded over and covered up, but venturing inside, they found only a queen-sized bed covered with burned sheets. The next was an abandoned tent found very close to the walking trail. Inside was a large stash of food like beans and rice, a sleeping bag, and a lonely teddy bear. Sometimes the stories with the least information and answers are scariest, as they allow our minds to wander and imagine various frightening scenarios. Number 8. Search returns strange evidence. A ranger and their coworker were called to head out and search for a group of teen hikers that had become separated from their group. They spent most of their day heading in the direction of where the teenagers had last been seen. Eventually, deep into the woods and their journey, they came across a startling discovery. They found branches which had been carved into spears placed into the ground, unidentifiable carvings in trees, children's stuffed toys hanging from ropes tied to the trees. One thing they noticed was that the symbols in the trees appeared to be freshly carved. As would be expected, the two were spooked, but settled down nearby as night was coming and they had to sleep. In the morning, they discovered shoe prints and a piece of fabric that had become caught on a tree. Someone had been there in the night. The teens were later discovered, and the two workers returned back to base, never knowing who had been in the woods with them that night. Number 7. Strange creature. A camp counselor in New York made a scary discovery when he was sneaking out late at night to meet up with his girlfriend. It was about 1 a.m. when he heard rustling in the woods next to him, expecting to be faced with something like a bear, deer, or other wild animal. Unexpectedly, a creature burst forth from the bushes towards him. In the darkness, he described the creature's appearance as being 3 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, and having 2 arms, looking like a miniature person. While it can be easy to misidentify animals in the dark of night, I personally can't think of any normal forest creature that would match anything close to this description. He then moved towards it and it apparently got scared, running away in a strange manner that the camp counselor described as being similar to doing the robot dance. To this day, he has no idea what the creature might have been. Number 6, light on the cliff. An unfortunate part of being a park ranger is having to go on search and rescue missions for missing people, and never knowing what state you might find them in, if at all. One park ranger recounts a story of him and his coworker on one of these calls, searching for a man in his 20s who had gone missing. As they spent the day searching with no luck, they decided to set up a camp and rest for the night. At about 2 a.m., he got up to go to the bathroom when he spotted a bright light moving on a cliff a few miles away, saying it looked to be like a flashlight beam. In the morning, they went to search that area and unfortunately found the missing man's body at the base of the cliff. What caught the ranger's attention was a flashlight, similar to the one he thought he had seen on the cliff. So it seems to make sense. The man had been walking with his flashlight and had unfortunately fallen. But it doesn't end there. When the coroner arrived to inspect the body, it was determined the man had clearly been dead for over 48 hours. So how could it have been him shining his flashlight on the cliff the night before? Apparently, another search and rescue team member had been near the area and hadn't seen any other people. To this day, there seems to be no explanation for what that light was. Number 5, burned mannequins. Another park ranger on Reddit shared his experience while working at a national wildlife refuge that had formerly been home to a U.S. Army lab site. The site had been completely transformed to become a wildlife refuge, with years of thorough cleanup needing to be done on things like barbed wire fences and barricades before it could be opened. One night, when the ranger was walking deep into the forest, he saw figures in the distance. This caught him off guard, as you're not permitted to leave the trails at all. So who was out there? The ranger announced himself and moved closer, and what he discovered was 6 mannequins in military uniforms, which appeared to have been badly burnt. 6 burned figures standing around in the woods in the dark of night would have been scary for anyone to stumble upon, though apparently he chalked it up to having been part of a fabric test. Still pretty scary to discover though, and to think it was somehow missed in the decade-long cleanup of the park. Number 4, only resident. A park ranger for a small island was the only year-round resident of the area. The island had no bridges or ferries and could only be accessed by private boats. The island would be crowded in the summer, but in the off-season, the island was only inhabited by the ranger. Walking at night, he was adventuring around the island, seeing if he could hike the entire distance. He saw a flash of white in the distance, thinking it was a herd of the brown and white deer which were local to the area. He pressed forward, before hearing something move again. Suddenly, out of the woods came a 6-foot-tall man wearing a bright white shirt. He sprinted straight up to the ranger with a strange grin on his face before shouting and laughing loudly, quickly sprinting back into the woods again. The ranger was rightfully terrified because, as far as he knew, he was the only person on the small island. For the next few days, he tried to find any evidence of another person living on the island, but never found any campsite, boats, or other signs of life. Number 3, mysterious stranger. A ranger was leading a hiking trip to the top of a mountain in North Carolina, a difficult hike far from any civilization. When they reached the peak, they set up a camp on a beautiful clear night. Since it was so nice out, after the group had gone to bed in their tents, the ranger chose to sleep outside in a hammock, reading a book to pass the time. Due to the brightness of the camp and the moon, it was easy for them to see around the camp and the trail that they had taken to get there. They were soon caught off guard by the sight of something moving, expecting it to be a bear. But as they got closer, they realized it was the shape of a person. They found it odd to see someone at the top of the difficult and long trail at night with no light or any sign of gear. They watched the person move closer towards the camp before the figure stopped, staring out at the camp. The figure stood there for a while before moving to sit under a tree, still staring intently. The ranger watched the man sit there for what was apparently a few hours before the figure got up and made his way back down to the trail. This left the poor ranger with a paranoid feeling of being followed for the remainder of the trip. Number 2, deer head. It's not uncommon to find animals or animal remains in the woods, circle of life and all that. But a Yellowstone ranger described their very bizarre experience which occurred near a valley deep into the park. While walking a trail, they found in the middle of the path the head of a deer. What was strange was that the head was perfectly clean, no sign of blood, and no sign of an animal having tried to eat it. The ranger didn't find any other signs of other animals that may have been around the area and done this. They also had no explanation for why a human may have done this, as it was a doe with no antlers that a hunter may want to collect. The experience left the ranger shaking and desperately trying to come up with an explanation for the bizarre and shocking discovery, but none could be found. Number 1, skin changer. One wildland firefighter shares a story that his supervisor had told him many times. Apparently, in Idaho, the crew had been working on a large fire incident and would have to be there through the night in order to deal with it. The supervisor went out on an ATV to get a look at the nearby area when a large cat, seemingly a bobcat, ran out into the road. The animal stood there and stared at him for a while before letting out a loud scream and running up a tree nearby the road. While startling, it didn't appear to be any reason for concern. Further down the road, he discovered an abandoned cabin. This was also strange as the land was federal property and there should be no buildings. The house appeared derelict and was boarded up, everything inside appearing incredibly out of order. Unsettled, the supervisor got back.
Opioid emergencies can happen anytime, anywhere.
He's breathing.
Be the difference.
Back on his ATV to head back, but at the exact same place where he had seen the bobcat, a woman stood in the road with a nightgown and bare feet. He asked if she needed help, to which she responded with a scream before running up the same tree the bobcat had, faster than any human would be able to. After returning, he asked locals about the cabin in the area, recounting his experience, to which they told him that he had likely had an encounter with a skin changer.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have tracks. Okay, so the last thing we want when talking about a huge sinkhole that happens to be in the ocean that holds many different secrets and mysteries at the bottom is to hear that we have found tracks, but we don't know what's causing these tracks. In December of 2018, a team of explorers and scientists decided to finally take a trip down to the bottom to see all there is to find at the bottom of the Great Blue Hole. We'll talk about this expedition a lot today, so remember it. Erica Bergman, who is the chief submarine pilot on the expedition and who is an oceanographer, explained that they had observed tracks at the bottom of the sinkhole, but that they were unable to identify them and that they remain, quote, open to interpretation. This alone isn't the most terrifying thing there, but when we take in some of the other things we know about the hole, like how it's the second largest marine sinkhole in the world, or how there could potentially be an entire cave system lurking somewhere in there, more on that later by the way, things start to get a little more unsettling. It quickly becomes clear that these mystery tracks are only a drop in the bucket of the mysteries of the Great Blue Hole. In our number 9 spot today, we have stalactites. The Great Blue Hole is a really popular diving destination, despite the fact that divers obviously can't go all the way to the bottom for a multitude of reasons. When diving here, you definitely need quite a bit of experience beforehand, and for those lucky ones who have done the work, they might be able to get just deep enough to see the incredible stalactites this sinkhole holds. While these are gorgeous to look at, they are part of the reason that we know some of the most ancient history behind this place at all. Stalactites are only formed when water is dripping down stone. This gave scientists the insight they needed to realize that this wasn't always a place that was submerged in water. In fact, they concluded that this was actually a big, dry cave and one of the most prolific eras in the history of our beautiful planet. This means that at some point there was probably a ton of stuff living in it. They believed that the cave likely formed during the last ice age, so sometime prior to 14,000 years ago, but at the end of the ice age it ended up flooding, collapsing, and thus we have the Great Blue Sinkhole. In our number 8 spot today, we have movements. This is one that really ties into the last one with the discovery of the stalactites. Of course, when they first found them, they took some samples so that they would be able to confirm their above sea formation. And when doing this analysis, it was realized that not only did they form above sea level, but that some of them were off vertical by about 5 degrees, and that these changes were consistent. This gave another very valuable insight into the history of this location and led scientists to the conclusion that there must have been some past geological shift or tilting of the plateau underneath at some point. This event would have been followed by a long period of relative stillness. This change in the stalactites showed us that the land must have been moving as well, not just the sea level rising. It's not the most unsettling thing on this list, but it certainly is cool. It's really amazing how such a small change can show us so much. In our number 7 spot today, we have trash. It has become abundantly clear that there really isn't any place on Earth that is free from human influence, and that most definitely includes our litter. If trash can make it to the deepest depths on Earth in the Challenger Deep, of course trash can somehow find its way down to the bottom of the Big Blue Hole. During that 2018 expedition we spoke about earlier, the team stumbled across more than they were expecting when they found a littered 2-liter Coke bottle. I'm glad it wasn't Pepsi. And they also found a lost GoPro. They were even able to see that this GoPro still contained some vacation photos. Safe to say that it's not the most remarkable discovery they made down there, but it should be something that might be a little concerning to us all. In our number 6 spot today, we have sand. Like I mentioned before, this sinkhole obviously has an incredibly rich history, and we are just starting to learn about the things that it holds, but it takes time, equipment, and money to really be able to have these sorts of large expeditions like the one in 2018. There might be fossils or other things just...
We match you with a dog owner who's looking for love. No bones about it. Head to bowchickabowwow.com to find out more.
A bad domain name losing you customers? Make your domain name easy with .online. Check if your dream domain name is available.
Waiting to be uncovered that we don't even know about yet, but the clock is ticking. As it turns out, as quickly as the blue hole appeared, it might also be disappearing. Apparently there are waterfalls of sand that are continually falling into the hole, and it's slowly but surely being filled up. It's like a real, very large, kind of scary hourglass, essentially. At least it's not something that's gonna happen overnight, so for now we still have time to admire its beauty and take a look at all of the mysteries it might be holding. Maybe it just serves as a reminder that nothing is permanent, except for the internet. In our number 5 spot today, we have more caves. So remember Erica Bergman we talked about before in the first one? She was the one who led the expedition in 2018, the submarine pilot. Well, she didn't only talk about mysterious tracks. She also explained that there is an enormous cavern close to the bottom of the hole. Like a huge unexplored cavern in the middle of a huge mysterious marine sinkhole. I'm just saying, that's more mystery than I can handle. This means that there could potentially be a large underwater cave system, and the Great Blue Hole is just the beginning of it. She said, quote, "The roof has collapsed on this particular cave, but the whole reef could be dotted with similar caverns which simply haven't collapsed into blue holes yet." Who knows what these cave systems could be hiding? Undiscovered species? Answers to some of the ocean's mysteries? The possibilities really are endless. In our number 4 spot today, we have marine life. So of course this stunning location is and they can do a lot of damage when the going gets tough or when they feel frightened or threatened, and that is just one of the many reasons that this is an area that hopes for more experienced divers rather than a place someone would recommend for their first solo dive. In our number 3 spot today, we have nitrogen. Another thing you will likely encounter should you choose to go diving here is something that is actually quite common for those who like to venture and dive in the deep sea. We are talking about nitrogen narcosis. Basically, divers of course use oxygen tanks to help them breathe underwater. These tanks normally don't just contain oxygen, they contain a mix of oxygen, nitrogen, and some other gases as well. This is all fine and well, but the deep sea is not like our lives up here. After about 100 feet, the increase in pressure can alter these gases, and to be honest, the further you go, the more the pressure increases. When these altered gases are inhaled, they can have unusual sort of intoxicating effects on the body. This is something that people who choose to dive here will experience, and it can be disorienting to say the very least. These effects are reversible and should wear off when you get to shallower water, but when you begin to feel the effects, it won't be at the time you're ascending. Your dive instructor will likely be only leading you deeper into the waters. This is all just a long way of saying it's a step you need to be aware of and prepared for. In our number 2 spot today, we have toxicity. So the simplest way to put this is that at the bottom of the Great Blue Hole, it is poisonous. After you get about 2/3 of the way down to the bottom, the water is just full of hydrogen sulfide. This means that there is little to no oxygen left down there, which is exactly why any marine creatures that get stuck down there are sure to meet a gruesome fate, but it is also why the water is actually toxic and corrosive. If you get deep enough without the proper protection, this hole will kill you and any other living thing that goes in it. It is truly unforgiving. Some of the experts in that 2018 expedition said that there were thousands of remains of marine life, like conches, which is a result of these creatures just getting a little too close to the edge. One explorer even said that you could see little prints where the conches presumably were trying to climb back up before being asphyxiated by the toxic water. Yeah, so basically while it looks beautiful on the surface, the Great Blue Hole is just a macabre marine life cemetery. In our number 1 spot today we have remains. By far the most unsettling of all of the discoveries on this list are the bodies of 2 divers that were found during this 2018 expedition. There have been 3 divers who are known to have gone missing after going diving in the Great Blue Hole, and to be honest, we aren't sure which 2 were found or exactly how they died. The reason for this is because, despite the fact that they were found, authorities decided that the best thing to do would be to leave them. Of course, rescue is a complicated process, but they agreed and decided that, quote, they're at peace where they are. It serves as a reminder of how dangerous it can be, even for those with all of the experience necessary.
Spend $400 between now and November 23rd and get a free turkey.
Oh, I'm free, baby. Want to get first dibs on new Walmart Black Friday deals? Join Walmart Plus now because members shop online 3 hours early. It all happens Wednesday, November 22nd at noon. Join Walmart Plus today and shop Black Friday deals.
Earth, a unique planet, restless and dynamic. Continents shift and clash. Volcanoes erupt. Glaciers grow and recede.
We all know that there are some things the elite don't want us to know about, but today we are learning just that. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the vintage photos the rich and powerful don't want you to see. Coming in at number 10 is North Korea Camp. North Korean prison camps are a place of horror. Now this photo was taken at one of their camps called Chonggori Camp. The main purpose of Chonggori Camp is to punish people for usual crimes or political crimes such as illegal border crossings. Now the prisoners here are also used as slave laborers, and as a result they are forced to do hard and dangerous work for 14 hours a day. The prisoners live in crowded, dirty, insect-infested rooms without heating, while there is just one washing room for 1,000 prisoners. Now because of these bad hygienic conditions, in the summer of 2003, about 190 prisoners died of an infectious disease. Now 70 prisoners sleep in a room which is only designed to hold 20 people, lying on the floor without pillows or blankets. Not to mention, prisoners only get 140 grams of rice 3 times a day, while they're being forced to do hard labor such as logging with iron chains. Now often prisoners have their lives ended or they are crippled in work accidents. Prisoners are regularly subjected to beatings and inhumane treatment, all of which are administered by the guard's discretion. When a prisoner breaks a rule, he is tormented and confined in a solitary cell so small where he cannot stretch his legs for many days or weeks. Now many people say these camps have human rights violations, and with everything we do know, I can't imagine all the other horrors of the other camps. Number 9. Dorothy Counts. Dorothy Counts is an American civil rights pioneer and one of the first black students admitted to the Harry Harding High School. In 1956, 40 black students from North Carolina applied to transfer to a white school after the passing of the Purcell Plan. Dorothy's family applied her and her two brothers to enroll in an all-white school after her father was approached by Kelly Alexander Sr. Now, of her family, only Dorothy was accepted, and Dorothy was dropped off on her first day of school by her father, along with their family friend, Edwin Tompkins. As their car was blocked from going closer to the entrance, Edwin offered to escort Dorothy to the front of the school while her father parked the car. As she got out of the car to head down the hill, her father told her, "Hold your head high, you are inferior to no one." Now, in this photo, you can see her being harassed by her classmates. After just 4 days of harassment that threatened her safety, her parents withdrew her from the school, but the images of Dorothy being verbally assaulted by her white classmates were seen around the world. Number 8. First woman in the Boston Marathon. Kathrine Switzer was 20 years old when she decided to run the Boston Marathon in 1967. Now, at the time, it was an all-male race. Women were not allowed to run, and organizers always ridiculed them. Now, no one believed a woman could run it, so when Kathrine signed up, she signed the necessary paperwork with her initials. When the race started, she set off alongside her boyfriend, Tom Miller, and while running, camera crews and photographers from a press bus spotted her and photographed her a lot. Now, as this was happening, an official spotted her running. Jock Semple, the race manager, ran after her in leather shoes and tried to rip off her number. "Get the hell out of my race and give me those numbers," he yelled. Now, before he could pull her out of the race, Tom blocked him. The idea of women running in the marathon was highly controversial. Now, Kathrine finished the race, knowing it would look like a publicity stunt if she stopped, and thankfully 5 years later, women were given the right to run in the marathon. Number 7. Last public execution.
I'm glad you're here, mate. I'm sorry that everything's so old-fashioned. This place is not for you. Things are so precarious and lonely.
No, go on.
Well. I gave you what you wanted!
I don't think I'll ever go home again.
Saltburn, rated R, now playing.
Welcome to today's real-time economy, where data reigns supreme. Smart data can boost your revenue through customer engagement and streamline your operations for maximum efficiency. Say hello to Syndigo Product Information Management, a solution that delivers your data your way. Syndigo PIM creates a single source of truth that can be shared across your entire organization to drive more effective business outcomes. Syndigo's cloud-native PIM solution is designed to help you unleash.
Eugen Weidmann was a German criminal and serial slayer who was executed by guillotine in France in June 1939, which was the last public execution in France. After a failed first attempt, Eugen and his accomplices managed to successfully kidnap an American woman named Jean de Koven, and Jean was lured to the house the trio rented, and she was strangled to death by Eugen and buried in the backyard. A couple months later, Eugen shot a chauffeur named Joseph Chofi to death and stole his money. Just 2 days later, Eugen ended the life of a woman named Janine Keller. Janine was also shot and robbed. 3 other people had their lives ended by Eugen and his accomplices, all of them being shot to death and then robbed. Eugen's last victim had a business card from Eugen in his house, which resulted in the police tracking down Eugen, since it seemed that he was one of the last people who had seen the victim alive. When confronted, Eugen tried to shoot the 2 policemen who had come to arrest him. However, Eugen was knocked unconscious with a hammer by one of the policemen and promptly taken into custody. He was found guilty of homicide and was sentenced to death. On June 17, 1939, Eugen was beheaded outside the prison in Saint-Pierre and Versailles. The historical behavior by spectators was so scandalous that French President Albert Lebrun immediately banned all future public executions. Number 6. Erase Nikolai Yezhkov. Nikolai Yezhkov was a Soviet secret police officer under Joseph Stalin who was the head of the NKVD from 1936 to 1938 during the height of the Great Purge. He organized mass arrests, torment, and executions, but then he fell from Stalin's good graces. He was arrested and subsequently admitted in a confession to a range of anti-Soviet activity, including unfound arrests during the Purge. He was executed in 1940 along with others who were were blamed for the purge, and Nikolai was not only ousted, executed, and disgraced along with his family, he was then methodically erased from photographs where he had previously appeared with his commander. Overnight, Nikolai went from one of the highest officers in a powerful New World Order to a shadow in a poorly lit photo and a name no one dared to utter. Now, Nikolai wasn't the only person to receive this Photoshop treatment, as it was common in the communist government to deny failures and make inconvenient truths even people disappear. Now, this practice has continued in current communist-led governments where rebellious leaders are removed by force and deleted from official documents. Number 5. Criminals in a box. This disturbing photo was taken in July 1913 by French photographer Albert Kahn. He often took trips through exotic countries, and it was during a visit in Mongolia that he happened to stumble upon this woman who had been condemned to a slow and painful starvation. She was boxed up in what would become her tomb and deposited in a remote desert. There were bowls of water on the ground, and the prisoner is allowed to beg passerbys for food, though not much is given. Now, the photographer was forced to leave her there, as it would be against prime directive of anthropologists to intervene in a culture's law or order system. Anthropologists are only able to observe, they cannot push their own beliefs or interfere in any way. Now, it's just incredibly disturbing though, and I can't imagine what was going through Albert's mind when he found her. Number 4. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michael. Anneliese Michael was a German woman who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites during the year before her death. When she was younger, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. After the taking of psychiatric medications for over 5 years failed to improve her symptoms, Anneliese and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism, and while rejected at first, 2 priests got permission from the local bishop in 1970.
When you need a partner committed to your vision, agents who are realtors are here for it. Here with market expertise that makes a difference. Here for it all, because that's who we are.
Today I'm going to talk to you guys about where I get my glasses. I buy direct.
75. The priest began conducting exorcism sessions and the parents stopped consulting doctors. She began increasingly speaking about dying to atone of the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. Now, a total of 67 exorcism sessions, 1 or 2 each week, lasting up to hours each, were performed for approximately 10 months in 1975 and 1976. Number 3. Radium Girls. The Radium Girls were female factory workers who contracted radiation poisoning from painting radium dials, watch dials, and hands with self-luminous paint. The incidents occurred at 3 factories in the United States, one in Orange, New Jersey, beginning around 1917, one in Ottawa, Illinois, beginning in the early 1920s, and one in Waterbury, Connecticut, also in the 1920s. Now, after being told that the paint was harmless, the women in each facility ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to point their brushes on their lips in order to give them a fine tip, and some also painted their fingernails, faces, and teeth with the glowing substance. Now, the prolonged exposure to radium caused dental pain, loose teeth, lesions, and ulcers, and the failure of tooth extractions to heal were some of these conditions. Now, many of the women later began to develop anemia, bone fractures, and caused their vertebrae to collapse, their jaws to swell up and fall off, and their lives to slowly end in agony while battling cancer. Now, the photo here shows one of the victims, and it's truly heartbreaking. Number 2. Unit 731. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation and biological weapons manufacturing during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. Now, this photo shows them experimenting on prisoners. It's estimated that this place ended the lives of 200,000 to 300,000 people. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes committed by the Japanese armed forces. It routinely conducted tests on people who were dehumanized and internally referred to as logs. Experiments included disease injections, controlled dehydration, biological weapons testing, vivisection, organ harvesting, amputation, and standard weapons testing. In other tests, subjects were deprived of food and water to determine the amount of time until death. They were also placed into low-pressure chambers until their eyes popped from their sockets, experimented upon to determine the relationship between temperatures, burns. They were hung upside down until death, crushed with heavy objects, electrocuted, dehydrated with hot fans, injected with animal blood, exposed to lethal doses of X-rays, subjected to various chemical weapons inside gas chambers, injected with seawater, and burned or buried alive. Now, this place was truly horrific, and so many people suffered. And coming in at number 1 is Blanche Monnier. When French authorities received an anonymous tip in 1901 that a woman was being held prisoner at an aristocrat's house in the city of Poitiers, they sent out officers to search the home. Behind the locked door of the pitch-black attic, they found a skeletal middle-aged woman laying on a straw mattress covered with her own excrement, while insects and rotting food littered the floor. Now, the room's odor was so disgusting that officers couldn't even continue their investigation, but they were able to learn that the 55-pound woman still clinging to life after 25 years trapped in that same room was named Blanche Monnier, and that her captor was her own mother. Now, this photo of her was taken shortly after she was rescued. Well, that's all for our list of vintage photos the rich and powerful don't want you to see. Which photo shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I'm your host, Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
And we're starting off the list with Ted Bundy. Not a name you'd ever associate with innocence. Ted Bundy was one of the most notorious sadistic criminals in American history. Between 1974 and 78, he took the lives of 30 young women, possibly more, across 7 different states. He'd lure his victims using his charismatic personality, taking them to a secluded location before attacking and restraining them, loading them into his car, and taking them away, never to be seen again. Pure evil can often look charming and innocent on the outside, but in Bundy's case, it goes a step further. Bundy actually worked on a hotline that helped prevent people from taking their own lives. Yeah, he was one of the folks taking those calls. Pretty noble work. On the outside, you'd look at someone like that and be like, wow, you're a fantastic person, convincing people to go on living, that it's worth having them here. Incredibly ironic that Bundy spent time talking to people on the phone, convincing them to keep themselves alive, when in his own time he'd ignore his victims' pleas to stay alive. Completely bonkers. At number 9, we have Jim Jones. Jim Jones was one of the most notorious cult leaders in history, responsible for convincing 918 people to take their own lives, and actually a significant portion of those people were forced to do it. He was a charismatic leader who gathered a very large following, but he started showing his dark side, turning what he originally sold as this peaceful, quote-unquote, socialist paradise into a full-on dictatorship. People couldn't even leave the settlement, and he surrounded the place with armed soldiers. Yeah, very democratic. And this all culminated in the aforementioned Jonestown. Before all this madness, though, Jim Jones was known as an outspoken activist. He even worked as the director of the Human Rights Commission in Indianapolis. Depending on people's political views, he would have either looked like a menace or a hero, but I don't think anyone would have predicted things to go the way they did. At least not early on, anyway. Next on the list, we have Dennis Rader. This guy was a Boy Scout leader. He was a member of the Lutheran Church, actually the president of the church council. On the outside, he was a dedicated family man, an upstanding member of the Wichita, Kansas community. He was also a despicable monster. Between 1974 and 91, he took the lives of at least 10 people, possibly more, and he loved what he did so much that he actually gave himself his own nickname, BTK. Just give that a quick Google to find out what it stands for. Not pretty. It's people like this that really test my faith in humanity. Gaining everyone's trust, having this outward image of being a good, decent human being, when really it's just a complete facade. It's also cases like this that make me roll my eyes whenever someone goes, oh, but he could never do that. He's not like that. Well, he can, and he did. Finding despicable people with an innocent facade was not difficult. It would have been much harder to form a list of evil people who were always suspected of being so. Number 7, Dr. Harold Shipman. We put our trust into our doctors, helping to keep us in good health and providing care and reassurance in the worst of times. Doctors are often thought of not just as good people, but great people. Highly respected and highly appreciated, most of the time anyway. But reality goes to show that no matter how green and majestic a field is, there's always